In this video, I'm going to go over joining your seam. That means the two ends of your rectangle that wrap around the cylinder will be joined. Again, as you're working, you want to make sure you're working on a mat, not on the table, so things don't stick. I'm going to grab my clay out of the bag very gently, trying not to affect the nice texture that I have, and I will rewrap my bag while I'm working so that my clay does not dry out that I'm going to use for my handle and for the bottom. Now here's the seam. This is what I'm talking about, where these two ends join. We need to connect them. To do that, we are going to use what's called slip. Slip is simply clay that has a lot of water in it. It's looks like this, and it works as a glue for what we're doing. So I'm going to grab a fork to make texture, because what I need to do is I actually need to make texture along each edge, and then I need to put the slip on there so that it joins. The texture works kind of like your fingers. It allows spaces for the glue to go in that really joins it up and firms up the seam when it closes. If you do not use slip to connect it, you are going to have issues. Now you might have two things happening here. One thing might be you have a lot of clay, extra clay. If that's the case, you should cut a little bit off. If I were cutting a little bit off, which mine is overlapping just slightly, so I'm just going to mark a small amount that I'm going to cut off. So I'm just taking a fettling knife or a needle tool, and I'm just marking where I'm going to cut before I do that. And then I'm going to unroll it, and I'm going to cut it off. And you want a nice straight cut, so use a ruler or something straight that you can lean your tool against that's cutting the clay. And then I'm going to roll it back on there. And if you do this, if you end up cutting some off, take little bits off at a time. It's better to take small bits a bunch of times than too much one time. So I need to actually cut a little bit more off. You can see it's not even quite yet. So I'm going to look from the top this time, and I'm going to try and cut it right about there. So I'm going to unroll it very gently again. The more that you work with the clay, the more that you unroll it, the riskier it is. So you got to really be gentle. Cut off a little bit extra, and let's try it one more time. And that looks pretty close on my seam there. You can see it's almost perfect. So if yours doesn't reach, if yours is something like this, sometimes you don't get enough clay and you have a little gap here. That means you're going to be joining it with the can out. So you're actually going to have to take the can out and then push the two ends together. At this stage, before we join it, we need to first do what's called scoring, or making marks to get that edge so it will lock in there better. So here's my edge. I'm just going to take a fork, and I'm going to put my hand right like this, and I'm just going to kind of make a bunch of lines. You want to make sure that you get this deep enough so that it will connect well. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to wrap it around. I'm going to put my hand so that I don't, the reason why I'm putting my hand there, I could even use a ruler, is I don't want to mush up that edge. I don't want to have it smeared too much, so having a little bit of something there gives it some structure, so when you're pulling it up, you're not really distorting it too much. If you don't have a fork here, you can see what I've done. You could use just a needle tool. Just make sure you do that. In fact, I would say overdo that. It's better to overdo it than to underdo it. Then I'm going to wrap it halfway back on like that, so you can just see a little bit there. And I'm going to take some of this slip, and I'm just going to do it on one side, and I'm going to add it to that edge. Just like scoring, where you're making those marks, it's better to overdo the slip. It's better to use too much slip. In fact, I would say that the slip should squeeze out of this seam when you squish it together. If it doesn't, you might not have used enough.